They thought the worst thing I could do was cry. They thought the worst thing I could do was scream, throw things, slam doors, and fall apart in a way that would confirm every quiet suspicion they had always held about me being too emotional, too dramatic, too much. They thought my pregnancy made me fragile. They thought the belly made me trapped. They thought the exhaustion behind my eyes meant I had already surrendered. They were wrong about all of it. My name is Clara. I am 31 years old. And 7 months ago, I did not pack a bag. I did not throw a single thing. I did not raise my voice above a polite, even, perfectly controlled tone. I simply picked up the phone, called the woman who had raised the man sleeping beside me every night for the past 4 years, and I read 4 hotel receipts out loud to her. One by one. Slowly. Clearly. In the same voice I use when I read bedtime stories to my niece. And then I said goodnight. And I hung up. When my husband came home that evening, his mother was sitting in our living room. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning because the beginning matters. The beginning is where you understand how a woman like me ends up standing in a walk-in closet on a Tuesday afternoon, holding a small folded stack of papers and feeling the entire architecture of her life quietly collapse in absolute silence. Before I tell you what I found in that jacket pocket, I need to tell you who I was before I found it, because the woman I was before matters just as much as the woman I became after. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where everybody knows your family name before they know your face. My parents were both teachers. My father taught high school history and my mother taught 4th grade, and they were the kind of people who genuinely believed that if you worked hard enough, if you were good enough, if you were kind enough, life would eventually be fair to you. That was the foundation I was built on. Hard work, kindness, fairness. The belief that if you did everything right, the people around you would do the same. I moved to Chicago at 23 for a marketing job with a mid-sized firm. Nothing glamorous, nothing extraordinary, but I was good at it. I was the kind of person who arrived early and stayed late, who remembered the names of everyone's spouses and children, who sent handwritten thank you notes after client meetings because my mother taught me that small gestures of respect leave lasting impressions. By the time I was 27, I had been promoted twice. I had a small but beautiful apartment near Lincoln Park. I had built a life for myself entirely from scratch, with no family money and no safety net, just the stubbornness my father always said I had inherited from his own mother. I met Daniel at a conference in the spring. He was a financial consultant, tall, with the kind of easy confidence that fills a room without demanding anything from it. He had a warm laugh and the habit of listening to you with his whole face, as if nothing in the world was more interesting than whatever you happened to be saying. I fell for that habit immediately. Later, I would wonder how many other women had fallen for it in exactly the same way. We dated for a year. We moved in together after 18 months. He proposed on a Thursday evening in October, in our kitchen, with no ceremony and no grand gesture, just a small velvet box on the counter while I was making pasta, and the way he said my name when I turned around made me cry in a way I had never cried before. Not from sadness. From the absolute certainty that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. We got married the following June. Small wedding. My parents, his parents, a handful of close friends. His mother, Patricia, cried during the vows. She told me afterward that she had always prayed for a daughter-in-law who would love her son the way he deserved to be loved, and that she believed God had finally answered that prayer when she looked at me. I held her hands when she said that. I believed every word. I believed I was exactly the answer to that prayer. The first 2 years of marriage were genuinely good. I want to be clear about that because it would be easier to tell the story if they had been secretly terrible from the beginning. It would be tidier. It would make more sense as a narrative. But they were not terrible. They were genuinely good. Daniel was a thoughtful husband. He remembered the small things. He knew I hated cilantro and always ordered my food without it. He knew I needed 30 minutes of quiet after work before I could have a real conversation. He knew that my mother's birthday made me emotional because it was also the anniversary of when my maternal grandmother died, and every year on that day, he would leave a small bouquet on the kitchen table before I woke up. These are not the actions of a man who is never real. These are the actions of a man who was real once, and then became something else. I do not know exactly when the change happened. That is the hardest part to explain to people. They always want a specific moment, a clear before and after, but relationships do not usually work that way. They shift gradually, the way weather changes. You look up one day, and the sky is a different color, and you cannot remember when the sun went behind the clouds, only that it did, and that the air is now colder than it used to be. About 2 years into the marriage, Daniel's work travel increased. Monthly trips to New York, then to Houston, then to Seattle. Always for client meetings. Always perfectly reasonable explanations attached to a perfectly professional calendar. He would text me from airports. He would call me from hotel rooms. He would bring me back small things. A candle from a shop in Brooklyn, a bag of coffee beans from a place in Seattle. He said, I would have loved. These small things kept me from looking too closely at the bigger picture. Then I got pregnant. We had talked about children in the abstract way couples do when they are happy and planning for a future together. Someday, when we are ready, when things settle. The pregnancy was not planned, but it was not unwanted. When the test came back positive, I stood in the bathroom for a long time looking at the result, and then I walked into the living room where Daniel was reading and I handed it to him, without saying anything. He looked at it for a moment, and then he looked at me and he smiled. A real smile. The kind I recognized from our early years. And I thought, this is it. This is the thing that brings us all the way back. I was wrong about that too. Once I was pregnant, something shifted in Daniel. Not immediately. Not dramatically, but steadily and unmistakably. He became less present. Not unkind, not cruel, just somehow increasingly absent even when he was in the room. His work travel picked up even more. The calls from hotel rooms became shorter. The small things he used to bring home stopped. When I mentioned the pregnancy at dinner one evening, trying to share something I had read about the third trimester, he nodded in the way people nod when they are not listening, and then checked his phone. I told myself I was being hormonal. I told myself he was under enormous pressure at work. I told myself that pregnancy was overwhelming for partners too, that the weight of impending fatherhood affected men differently, that his distance was fear rather than indifference. I constructed an entire architecture of reasonable explanations because the alternative was something I was not ready to look at directly. I should tell you that I am not a woman who ignores her instincts. I have never been that woman. My instincts have served me well in every area of my professional and personal life. I trusted my gut when I turned down a job offer that seemed too good at 25 and later found out the company collapsed 6 months later. I trusted my gut about friendships, about neighborhoods to live in, about which clients at work were trustworthy. My instincts have always been sharp and reliable. During my pregnancy, I silenced them, deliberately and consistently. I told them to be quiet. I overrode them with logic and rationalization and the desperate hope that being patient and generous and understanding would eventually be rewarded. I was 7 months pregnant and terrified of being right about the thing I felt in the pit of my stomach every time Daniel's phone lit up and he tilted the screen away from me. It was a Tuesday in early March. I remember the exact feeling of the afternoon. The light outside was pale and watery, the kind of early spring light that cannot decide whether to commit to warmth or retreat back into gray. I was not having a good day physically. My back ached. My ankles had swollen to the point where I had given up on shoes with any structure. I had taken the afternoon off from working at home and was simply moving slowly through the apartment, doing nothing in particular, just being a heavily pregnant woman in the quiet of her own home. Daniel's gray blazer was hanging on the hook near the bedroom door. He had worn it to a client meeting the previous week and had asked me twice to take it to the dry cleaner. Both times I had forgotten. It was the third time I reached for it, fully intending to put it in the bag I kept for dry cleaning, that I felt the weight in the inside breast pocket. I am not someone who goes through pockets with suspicious intent. I want to be clear about that. I was not looking for anything. I was not following a hunch in that particular moment. I was genuinely just doing a habitual check of pockets before sending a jacket to be cleaned. My mother taught me that. You always check the pockets before the cleaner. You find pens, receipts, gum wrappers, the small detritus of a life carried around in a jacket. What I found was a small folded stack of papers. I took them out and unfolded them. 4 receipts from the same hotel, the Langham, Chicago. A hotel I have walked past dozens of times. A hotel I have always thought looked beautiful from the outside. A hotel that costs I saw immediately from the receipts, somewhere between $400 and $600 per night. Daniel had not been in Chicago during any of the dates printed on those receipts. He had been in New York, then in Houston, then in Seattle. Or so I had believed. I stood in the bedroom doorway holding those 4 pieces of paper, and I went very still in a way that I think is specific to moments of genuine, total revelation. Not the kind of still that means you are calm. The kind of still that means every single system in your body has temporarily redirected all available resources to your brain, because your brain is doing something enormous, and it needs everything it can get. I read the dates on each receipt. March 3rd through March 4th. March 10th. March 17th through March 19th, March 24th. I went to my phone. I opened Daniel's texts. I am not proud of this, but I am telling you the truth. And the truth is that in that moment the lock on his phone did not stop me because the code was our wedding anniversary and that had never changed. I opened the texts. I scrolled through his messages. I found a thread with a contact saved only as K. I did not read every message. I read enough. 3 minutes of reading was sufficient. I put the phone down carefully exactly where I had found it, and I stood in the middle of my bedroom and I breathed. Here is what I did not do. I did not cry. Not a single tear, not in that moment. I have thought about this many times since, and I think the reason is that some revelations are too large for immediate emotion. The emotion comes later. In that first moment, your nervous system does something almost merciful, a kind of temporary anesthesia that allows your brain to function without being flooded. I was clear-headed in a way that was almost eerie. Sharp. Precise. Entirely focused. I did not pack a bag. I want you to understand why. Packing a bag is a performance of devastation. It tells a story in which I am the woman undone, the woman fleeing, the woman whose only available response is physical displacement. I did not feel like that woman. What I felt, standing in that bedroom with 4 hotel receipts in my hand and the knowledge of who Kay was settling into my body like cold water, was something else entirely. I felt, underneath the enormous weight of what I now knew, a clarity so precise it almost felt like rage, but quieter than rage. Steadier. I was 7 months pregnant. I was carrying Daniel's child in my body. I had given this man 4 years of my complete and honest love. I had built a life alongside him with the same intentionality and care I brought to everything. And he had taken that life, that trust, that love, and he had used it as cover. He had used my belief in him as a kind of camouflage. He had slept beside me and eaten dinner with me and made plans for our future together while simultaneously building something else in hotel rooms I had walked past and thought looked beautiful. I stood there for a long time, long enough for the afternoon light outside to shift perceptibly. And then I made a decision. I was not going to scream. I was not going to pack. I was not going to call a friend and cry on the phone. I was not going to do any of the things that a betrayed wife is expected to do, the things that allow a betraying husband to position himself as the more rational party in the inevitable conversation that follows. I was not going to give him that. I was going to call Patricia. I want to tell you about Patricia before I tell you about the phone call, because she matters to this story in a way that is more complicated than simple. Patricia is a woman of immense social propriety. She comes from a family in which appearances were maintained with almost military discipline, in which the presentation of a functioning, respectable life was considered the primary obligation of every member of the household. She is not a warm woman, in the way my own mother is warm. She is formal, a little stiff, prone to certain judgments she does not always voice but which you can always feel hovering somewhere in the room. She was never unkind to me. But she was never entirely comfortable with me either. I always sensed that I was not quite what she had imagined for Daniel. Not quite the right background, the right level of pedigree, the right kind of family name. But she loved Daniel absolutely. In the particular and consuming way that certain mothers love their sons, a love that sometimes tips into possession, into the inability to see the son clearly, because seeing him clearly might mean acknowledging something painful. She believed, with complete sincerity, that Daniel was fundamentally a good man, a good son, a faithful husband. A man of character. I thought about this as I scrolled to her name in my contacts. I thought about the expression on her face at our wedding when she told me she had prayed for a daughter-in-law who would love her son the way he deserved. I thought about every Sunday dinner at her house, every holiday, every small family gathering where she had watched Daniel with pride and me with the barely perceptible distance of a woman reserving her full approval. I thought about how much she believed she knew her son. And then I pressed call. She answered on the third ring. Her voice was warm in the way it usually was when it was just the two of us, before Daniel was present to make the dynamic more formal. She asked how I was feeling, how the baby was, whether the back pain I had mentioned the week before had improved at all. She asked if I was resting enough. She said she had been meaning to call. I said, Patricia, I need to read you something. Do you have a few minutes? She said, of course. What is it? Is everything all right? I said, everything is fine, physically. I just found something in Daniel's jacket, and I want to read it to you so that there is no confusion later about what I found and when I found it. There was a brief silence. Then she said, all right. I read the first receipt, the date, the hotel, the room number, the total, the nights of the stay. I said his name was on the receipt. I said the dates. I said these were the dates he told me he was in New York for client meetings. Silence from Patricia's end. I read the second receipt. The same hotel. A different date. The dates he had told me he was in Houston. More silence. I read the third. And the fourth. I did not rush. I did not let my voice waver. I read them the way you read documents in a professional meeting, clearly and without embellishment, letting the information speak for itself, without any editorial added on top of it. When I finished the fourth receipt, I said, I also found messages on his phone from a contact saved as K. I am not going to read those to you because some of what they contain is not something I am able to repeat right now. But I wanted you to know what I found, and I wanted you to hear it from me. Patricia said my name. Just my name, in a voice I had never heard from her before. A voice stripped entirely of its usual composure. I said, good night, Patricia. I hope you are well. And I hung up. I sat on the edge of the bed afterward. My hands were not shaking. I was surprised by this because I had expected them to shake. I put the 4 receipts back in my lap and I looked at them for a while, and then I folded them carefully and put them in the zipper pocket of my own purse, which is where they have been ever since. I went to the kitchen and I made myself a cup of herbal tea. I am not normally a herbal tea person. I like my coffee strong and dark, and my mother has been telling me since my 20s that I drink too much of it. During the pregnancy, I had switched to herbal tea under mild protest and had developed an unexpected affection for chamomile with a small amount of honey. I made a cup of that, and I sat at the kitchen table and I drank it slowly. At some point during that cup of tea, my phone rang. It was Daniel. I watched his name on the screen until it stopped ringing. He called again. I watched that call stop too. A moment later, a text came through. Just checking in, heading home soon, need anything from the store? I put the phone face down on the table. The thing about being 7 months pregnant is that time moves differently. Everything is heavier and slower, and your relationship to urgency has fundamentally changed. You cannot sprint anymore, literally or metaphorically. You are forced into a kind of deliberate pace by the sheer physical reality of carrying another human being inside your body. I found this oddly useful that evening. I was not capable of frantic action, even if I had wanted it. My body demanded I stay seated. My body demanded I breathe slowly. My body reminded me, with every kick and shift and small interior earthquake, that there was someone else to consider now whose needs were more important than my own fury. I sat at that table for almost an hour. When I heard the key in the lock, I did not get up immediately. I heard Daniel come in, heard him drop his bag in the hallway, heard him call my name. I heard the hesitation when I did not immediately answer, the brief silence, and then the sound of him walking toward the kitchen. He appeared in the kitchen doorway and stopped. His mother was sitting at the kitchen table across from me. I had not told you that part yet. I had not told you that approximately 40 minutes after I hung up with Patricia, there was a knock at my door, and when I opened it, there was my mother-in-law standing in the hallway of my apartment building with her coat still on and her handbag clutched in both hands, and her face doing something I had never seen it do before. Something crumpled. Something undone. I had let her in without a word. I had made her a cup of tea. I had placed the 4 receipts on the table between us. I had sat back down. And we had sat in something that was not quite silence and not quite conversation for most of the 40 minutes until Daniel's key turned in the lock. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at his mother, and then at me, and then back at his mother, and then at the table where the 4 receipts lay in a neat row between 2 cups of tea. He said nothing for a long moment. His mother said his name. Just his name. In that same stripped voice I had heard on the phone. And then she said nothing else. She did not ask him to explain. She did not give him the opportunity to build an initial defense before the evidence was presented. The evidence was already there on the table in front of him, for pieces of paper that he recognized immediately. I could see it in his face the moment he registered what they were. I said, "I found those in your jacket. I was going to take it to the dry cleaner." He opened his mouth. Then he closed it. Then he looked at his mother again, and whatever he saw in her face closed off whatever he had been about to attempt to say. I said, "I called your mother because I wanted her to hear about this before you had the chance to manage the conversation. I wanted her to know first. I thought she deserved that. This is not the kind of thing women in these situations are supposed to do. We are supposed to suffer privately, to cry in bathrooms, to confide in one friend who swears to tell no one but tells everyone. We are supposed to give the man at the center of the betrayal the maximum possible control over the information and the narrative. We are supposed to be too hurt to be strategic, too devastated to be deliberate. We are supposed to fold. I had chosen not to fold. I had chosen instead to pick up a phone and make one call, and in doing so I had handed the situation to the one person whose opinion mattered more to Daniel than any other. I had bypassed every possible avenue of private negotiation, every possible space for him to explain or minimize or contextualize or perform remorse in the carefully calibrated way that men who have been caught performing remorse. I had gone directly to the person who still believed in him most completely, and I had let the receipts speak for themselves. Patricia stayed for 2 hours. I will not tell you everything that was said because some of it was between a mother and her son and belongs to them even now. But I will tell you that Daniel did not attempt to deny it. I think the combination of his mother's presence and the specificity of the receipts and the careful and deliberate way in which I had delivered this information made denial seem like a humiliation too far even for someone willing to sit at the kitchen table in the first place. He said he was sorry. He said it several times, to me and to his mother. He said things I will not repeat here because they are his words and I have no obligation to carry them. His mother said things to him that surprised me in their severity. I had expected her, on some level, to find a way to manage it, to soften it, to protect him from the full weight of what he had done. She did not do that. She said his name in a tone I will never forget, and she asked him one question, a single question that I also will not repeat because it belongs to her, and the way he could not answer it said everything. I sat at the kitchen table and I drank a second cup of chamomile tea, and I let the conversation happen around me without requiring anything for myself but presence. At some point, Patricia stood up and put on her coat. She came to me and put her hands on my face in a gesture so unexpected and so tender that it was the first time I nearly cried in that entire evening. She said my name. She said she was sorry. She said it more than once. She said she had prayed for a woman who would love her son the way he deserved, and she was the one who had gotten it wrong about who deserved what. Then she squeezed my face gently between her palms and she kissed my forehead and she walked out of my apartment without looking at Daniel again. The door clicked shut. Daniel and I sat in the kitchen together for a long time after that. There was no screaming because I had already decided there would not be any screaming, and some decisions, once made, become very easy to keep. We talked in the deliberate and careful way that people talk when they both understand that something enormous has already happened and that the talking is not going to undo it but needs to occur anyway. He told me things I had already partly known from the messages on his phone, and some things I had not known. I did not ask for details I did not need. I asked only the things I needed to know for the practical reality of what came next. What came next was this. 2 days later, I made an appointment with a family law attorney. I found her through a recommendation from my oldest friend, who had been through her own divorce 3 years prior and trusted her implicitly. Her name was Margaret, and she was exactly the kind of woman you want in your corner when your life needs to be legally reorganized. Precise, calm, methodical, and utterly unsentimental about the process. She looked at my situation. She listened to everything I told her, and then she laid out my options in the clear, numbered way of someone who has done this enough times to know that clarity is the most useful thing she can offer. I will not walk you through the legal details because they are tedious and specific and not the point of the story. The point is that I was prepared. I was financially independent. The apartment was in both our names, but I had records of my own contributions to the down payment and the mortgage that my attorney said would be straightforward to establish. I had a stable income. I had family nearby who could help with the baby. I had the kind of practical groundwork already laid, not through suspicion but through the simple habit of maintaining my own financial identity that my mother had instilled in me even before I understood why it mattered. I was not trapped. I had never allowed myself to be trapped. And so when the moment came, I was not starting from nothing. I was starting from a foundation I had been quietly building for years without knowing I would ever need it for this. The pregnancy continued. My body kept doing the extraordinary and unsentimental work of building another person inside it regardless of what was happening in my marriage. I went to every appointment. I did the breathing exercises and the prenatal yoga class at the community center and the dietary adjustments my midwife recommended. I read the books. I built the crib with my father, who drove down from Ohio the weekend after I told my parents what had happened, and who did not say much, but who put the crib together with a focus and care that communicated everything he could not find words for. My mother stayed for 2 weeks. She cooked every meal and cleaned every surface and sat with me in the evenings and let me talk or not talk, depending on what I needed on any given night. She did not push me toward any particular decision or any particular emotion. She simply showed up and stayed, and I understood for the first time in my adult life that showing up and staying is one of the most profound things a person can offer another person. Daniel and I navigated the practical arrangements with less drama than I might have expected. There were difficult conversations. There were moments of grief that I could not have predicted. Not grief for the betrayal exactly, but grief for the version of the future I had believed in, for the pictures in my head that would never now develop into reality. Grief is strange and specific and does not always attach itself to the things you expect. I grieved things I had never even articulated to myself, a particular version of the first birthday party, a particular imagined Sunday morning in the apartment, small specific future moments that I had held in my imagination without even knowing I was holding them. I allowed myself to grieve those things. I did not allow myself to be paralyzed by them. Our daughter was born on a Tuesday in May. 6 pounds and 4 ounces. A small, serious face, and a remarkable amount of hair and eyes that were impossible to read, because newborn eyes are always trying to figure out what world they have landed in. The labor was long and hard, and at the end of it I was so tired I could barely lift my head, and my mother was on one side of me and my best friend was on the other, and when they put my daughter on my chest for the first time I said something I do not fully remember, but which my mother later told me was her name. We had decided on the name months earlier, before everything collapsed. I had liked the name, and Daniel had agreed. I kept it. The name was mine too. I did not need his agreement to have chosen well. Daniel was present for the birth, which I had been ambivalent about but had ultimately decided was the right thing for the child rather than for either of us. He was composed and appropriate. He did not try to make it into something it was not. Afterward, he held her for a while, and I watched his face do something genuine and unperformable, and I understood that his capacity to love this child was real even if his capacity to be faithful had not been. These are separate things. I have had to hold them separately, and it has not been easy, but it is the truth. By the time she was 6 weeks old, the legal arrangements were in process. I was living in the apartment because my attorney advised it and because it was simply more practical for a newborn's needs. Daniel had moved to a sublet nearby. We had agreed on a co-parenting arrangement that was painful to draft and necessary to have. Patricia came every Sunday. She had called me the day after the receipts, and the day after that, and every few days since. She brought food and held the baby and said very little about Daniel, and I found that I was able to accept her presence with more grace than I would have expected, because she had done the thing I needed most that evening. She had not looked for the convenient explanation. She had not reached for the comfortable interpretation. She had sat at my table, and she had seen it clearly, and she had said she was sorry. That matters. Seeing clearly and saying so, that is not nothing. I've been asked many times since by friends and by my mother and by the occasional person who knows the story, whether I regret how I handled it, whether I wish I had done something different, whether the phone call to Patricia was the right thing to do. I say the same thing every time. I was 7 months pregnant. I was alone in my apartment. I had 4 hotel receipts in my hand and the knowledge of what they meant settling into my body. I did not scream. I did not break anything. I did not perform my grief for an audience. I made 1 phone call, and I read 4 receipts out loud, and I said goodnight, and then I sat at my kitchen table and drank chamomile tea and waited. I waited because I knew something that a man who's been caught by his pregnant wife in the kitchen doorway with his mother looking up at him from the table does not know in that moment. I knew exactly what I had done, and I knew exactly what I was going to do next. And those 2 things, the knowing and the readiness, are a kind of power that has nothing to do with volume or fury or the theatrical devastation of packing a bag in front of someone who expects you to crumble. My daughter is almost 6 months old now. She has a serious face and a lot of opinions, expressed in the limited but remarkably effective vocabulary of an infant. She prefers to be upright, carried against a shoulder, with a view of whatever room she is in. She does not like to be laid flat unless she is asleep. She has my eyes and Daniel's mouth and a particular way of frowning at things that confuse her that my mother says is entirely mine. I am learning how to be her mother in real time, the way everyone does, through imperfect daily practice and the gradual accumulation of knowledge about this specific person who has arrived in the world with her own complete set of requirements and preferences. It is the hardest and most absorbing thing I have ever done. Nothing in my professional life, nothing in my personal life, not even the controlled demolition of my marriage, compares to the relentless and humbling work of keeping another human being alive and helping them understand that the world is safe enough to be curious about. I think about the woman who stood in the bedroom doorway in March, holding those 4 receipts, 7 months pregnant, deciding what to do. I think about what she knew and what she chose. I think about the moment she pressed call on Patricia's name in her contacts, the deliberate and purposeful nature of that gesture, not an act of vengeance in the dramatic sense, but something more precise than that. An act of clarity, an act of refusal. A refusal to be the only one who carried the full weight of what those receipts contained. I would make the same choice again. I would pick up that phone and I would dial that number, and I would read those receipts in the same clear, even voice. One by one, slowly. The way my mother taught me to read aloud when I was small, carefully, without rushing because the words deserve to be heard. I would say goodnight. I would hang up. And then I would go to the kitchen and make a cup of chamomile tea and wait for the world to reorganize itself around the truth. Because here is what I learned from 4 hotel receipts and 1 phone call and a Tuesday evening that I will remember in complete sensory detail for the rest of my life. Silence is not the same as powerlessness. Calm is not the same as surrender. And the most devastating thing you can do to a man who believed that his pregnant wife was too exhausted, too grateful, too deeply invested in the life they had built together to look too closely at what he was doing in hotel rooms on Tuesday nights is to find the thing he hid in his jacket pocket and not scream about it at all. To simply pick up a phone. To read it out loud to his mother. And to say goodnight. Some mornings I wake up before my daughter, and I stand in the doorway of her room, and I watch her sleep. She sleeps with 1 arm thrown above her head, which my mother says is exactly how I slept as a baby. The light in the room at that hour is the pale, liquid quality of very early morning before the sun has fully committed to the day, and everything is quiet except for the particular kind of quiet that contains the breathing of someone asleep. I stand there, and I think about the woman I was before that Tuesday in March and the woman I am now. I do not think they are entirely different women. I think I have always been this woman. I think I simply did not know it yet, did not know the specific shape of what I was capable of until the moment required me to find out. My daughter breathes. The morning light strengthens. Downstairs, a city continues its relentless and unsentimental business of being a city. I go make coffee. Strong dark coffee because the pregnancy is over and the chamomile tea was never really my thing. The day begins. I begin with it. And I am not afraid of what comes next. I have already survived the thing I was most afraid of, and it turned out that surviving it required not a single raised voice, not a single dramatic gesture, not a single packed bag. It required only 4 hotel receipts, 1 phone call, and the particular kind of courage that looks, from the outside, like perfect composure. From the inside, it felt like something else. Something harder and quieter, and more necessary than courage. Something I do not have a word for yet. Maybe I will find the word for it later. Maybe my daughter, when she is old enough to understand this story, will have a word for it that I have not yet thought of. Until then, I will simply call it what it was. The truth, delivered clearly, to exactly the right person, at exactly the right moment. That is all I did. That was enough. There is a particular kind of aftermath that nobody tells you about. Not the dramatic aftermath, the legal proceedings and the difficult conversations and the reorganization of a shared life into 2 separate lives. Those things people acknowledge, those things there are books about and podcasts about and therapists trained specifically to address. I mean the other kind of aftermath, the quiet, daily, granular kind. The kind that shows up in ordinary moments when you are not expecting it and asks you to feel something you thought you had already finished feeling. For me, it showed up in grocery stores. Specifically in the condiment aisle at the grocery store 3 blocks from my apartment, which I have been shopping at for the entire 4 years I lived in that neighborhood. I went there for the first time alone, about 2 weeks after everything happened, and I stood in front of the pasta sauces for what must have been 5 full minutes before I realized I was standing there not because I could not decide between the arrabbiata and the marinara, but because every time I had bought pasta sauce in that store for the past 4 years, I had automatically reached for the one Daniel preferred. And now I did not need to consider what Daniel preferred. I could reach for anything. I could reach for the arrabbiata, which I had always liked better and had been quietly compromising on for years. I could reach for a completely new brand I had never tried. I could reach for nothing and go home and make something entirely different. I stood in that aisle for 5 minutes because the freedom was so disorienting it felt, briefly, like loss. I bought the arrabbiata. I took it home. I made pasta, and I ate it standing at the kitchen counter because the baby was asleep and I did not want to sit at the table alone. And then I stood at the counter eating arrabbiata pasta and crying in the particular way I had not been able to cry the evening I found the receipts, which is to say messy and without dignity and with the full involuntary force of everything that had been waiting patiently behind the composure. I stood at the counter and I cried until I stopped, which took a while. And then I washed my face, and I went and checked on my daughter, and I went to bed. The next morning I got up and made coffee, and got to work. This is the thing about grief that surprises people. You think it will be linear. You think there will be a progression from devastated to sad to processing to healed, some kind of emotional through line with a beginning and a middle and a discernible end. It is not like that. It is more like weather. There are storms and there are calm stretches, and sometimes a day that starts perfectly clear turns dark with no warning, and sometimes a day you expected to be terrible turns out to be fine, genuinely fine, not performed fine but actually fine. You learn to stop predicting it. You learn to carry an umbrella and not be surprised when you need it. I went to therapy. I want to say this clearly because I think there is sometimes a suggestion in stories like mine that the woman who handles things with composure and strategy does not also need support. I needed support. I sought it. My therapist is a woman in her 50s who has an office full of plants and a habit of asking questions I don't want to answer, which I have come to understand means she is asking exactly the right ones. She asked me, about a month into our sessions, what I was most afraid of. Not about the practical situation, not about the co-parenting arrangement or the financial reorganization or the legal process. What I was most afraid of in the deeper sense. I thought about it for a long time before I answered. And then I said, I am afraid that I chose badly, and that choosing badly says something fundamental about my judgment. That if I could be wrong about this, about a person I lived with and trusted for 4 years, then I could be wrong about anything. About my own instincts. About my own ability to read the world accurately. She asked me what I thought. I said I thought the alternative was worse. I said I thought the alternative, The belief that I should have known, that I should have seen it sooner, that the signs were there and I chose not to look, was a story in which the blame for his choices lived partly in me. And I did not believe that was true. I did not believe I had failed to see. I believed I had chosen, consciously and deliberately, to trust a person who was telling me he was trustworthy. That is not bad judgment. That is what trust looks like. Trust is not naive when it is given to someone who is actively working to deserve it. Daniel was actively working to deserve it. He was performing deserving it with considerable skill. The failure was his performance. The failure was his choice to perform rather than to be. She wrote something down. I did not ask what. I have been back many times since. We have covered a great deal of territory. I recommend it without qualification. My friends, when I told them what had happened, reacted in the particular ways that friends react to devastating news about people they care about. My oldest friend, the one who referred me to my attorney, arrived at my apartment within 2 hours of me texting her and stayed until midnight and said very little but made sure my glass was always full of water and that I had eaten something. My friend from work, who is younger than me and tends toward dramatic emotional expression, cried more than I did and said several things about Daniel that I will not repeat here because they were colorful and specific and probably more satisfying to say than to document. My college roommate, who lives in Portland and could not come in person, sent me a care package that arrived 3 days later and contained chamomile tea, which made me laugh until I also cried, and a note that said, "You have always been the strongest person I know, and I mean that as a compliment and not an invitation to feel like you have to be strong right now. I have good people. I do not take that for granted." Daniel and I have found, over the months since, a functional arrangement for our daughter's sake. It is not easy and it is not comfortable, and there are moments when the practical requirements of co-parenting force me into a proximity to him that costs me something real. But I am doing it. We are both doing it. Our daughter does not yet have language for what her family looks like, but she has both of her parents in her life, and she has grandparents who love her, and she sleeps with one arm above her head like I did and frowns at things that confuse her the way my mother says I do, and she is growing with the particular speed of the very young that feels simultaneously impossible and inevitable. Patricia comes every Sunday. I said this already and I am saying it again because I think it bears repeating. She comes every Sunday and she holds her granddaughter and she brings food, and she has never, in all of those Sundays, said a single word to me that attempts to excuse or minimize or explain what her son did. She has not asked me to be merciful or understanding or to consider things from his perspective. She has simply come every Sunday and been present and been sorry and been genuinely and visibly besotted with her granddaughter. And gradually, I have come to understand that her presence on those Sundays is itself an acknowledgement. That she could have retreated. That she could have folded herself into denial or defensiveness. That she chose not to. That she looked at those 4 receipts on my kitchen table, and she chose not to look away. I have more respect for her now than I did before any of this happened. That is a strange thing to say, and I am aware of its strangeness, but it is true. There are things I know now that I did not know before March. I know that I am capable of a degree of controlled precision under pressure that I had not previously been required to demonstrate. I know that my instincts, the ones I silenced during the pregnancy, were accurate, and that silencing accurate instincts is a thing I will not do again. I know that the people who love me are capable of showing up in ways I had not anticipated and of surprising me with the depth and constancy of their care. I know that chamomile tea is actually not bad if you put enough honey in it. I know that my daughter's first real smile happened at 5 weeks and 3 days, on a Thursday morning when I was holding her in front of the bedroom window, and the sun came through at an angle that lit up her face, and she looked at me, and her face arranged itself into something that was unmistakably delight. I know exactly what that felt like to witness. I know that no hotel receipt, no betrayal, no kitchen table conversation, no legal proceeding, no amount of grief process standing over a bowl of arrabbiata pasta is capable of touching that moment or taking it away from me. These things are mine. These things have always been mine. They were mine before I found those receipts, and they are mine now, and they will be mine in 10 years when my daughter is old enough to be confusing and exhilarating and completely herself, whatever completely herself turns out to mean for her. I am building something. I am building it carefully and deliberately, and without the particular anxiety of someone who believes that everything depends on a single other person remaining exactly who they have said they are. I am building it with the knowledge that I have been through the thing I was most afraid of and that I survived it, and that the survival did not require me to be anyone other than who I already was. A woman who checks pockets before the dry cleaner. A woman who makes one phone call. A woman who reads 4 receipts out loud in a clear, even voice and says goodnight, and hangs up. A woman who then makes chamomile tea and waits. And waits. And is not afraid of what is waiting on the other side of the wait. If you are reading this and you recognize something of yourself in it, if you are the woman standing in a bedroom doorway holding something you did not expect to find, holding the weight of a truth you are not yet sure you are ready to live inside, then I want to tell you something. You do not have to pack a bag to be brave. You do not have to scream to be heard. You do not have to perform your devastation for anyone. You do not have to be frantic or broken or visibly undone to be someone who has every right to be furious. You can be calm. You can be deliberate. You can decide quietly and without announcement exactly what you're going to do next. And then you can do it. One step at a time. As slowly as you need to. The clarity will come. It comes when you stop spending your energy on the performance of grief and put it towards something useful instead. It comes when you pick up the phone and dial the number and say the thing that needs to be said in the voice that needs to say it. It comes when you hang up and make the tea and sit at the table and let the truth do the work that you have been trying to do all by yourself. The truth is efficient when you let it work. My daughter woke up this morning and looked at the light coming through the window and frowned at it the way she frowns at things that are still new to her. Then she looked at me and she frowned at me too, temporarily, because I am also still somewhat new to her, even after 6 months, even after every morning and every middle of the night and every long afternoon of us figuring each other out. Then the frown cleared, and she looked at me with those serious eyes that are trying to figure out what world they have landed in. And I held her up so she could see more of the room, and she looked at all of it carefully. And then she looked back at me, and I said, "Good morning." And she said nothing because she is 6 months old and does not yet have language. But she was satisfied. She had seen what she needed to see. The world was present and accounted for. I was present and accounted for. That was enough. It is, I find, usually enough. You just have to know where to look. And when to pick up the phone. I want to talk about the weeks before I found those receipts, because I think they matter in a way I have not fully addressed yet. I want to talk about what it means to know something and choose not to know it, and then to stop choosing, and what that transition feels like from the inside. There is a phrase people use which is that they had a feeling. Women especially say this, "I had a feeling, I just knew, something told me." And then they qualify it immediately, as if the knowing requires apology. But I knew something wasn't right. As if the intuition needs to be contextually framed, excused for its existence, presented as both valid and somehow embarrassing. I did this myself. I said to my mother once, about 3 months into the pregnancy, there are moments where I feel like he is somewhere else even when he is standing right in front of me. And then I immediately followed it with, "But he is under a lot of pressure, I am probably just being hormonal." My mother said something then that I did not fully hear at the time. She said, "Hormones don't invent things, Clara. They amplify things that are already there." I filed that away. I did not take it out and look at it again until March. Until a bedroom doorway and 4 hotel receipts. What I understand now that I did not understand then is that the choice to not know is never actually neutral. It costs something. It costs it in the small daily calibrations you make to accommodate the thing you are not looking at. The extra patience you extend. The extra explanations you generate. The way you catch yourself starting a sentence and then changing it at the last moment because the original sentence was headed somewhere you are not ready to go. The tiredness that accumulates not from the pregnancy, not from the work, not from anything you can name, but from the ongoing effort of maintaining the space between what you feel and what you are willing to believe. By the time I found those receipts, I had been carrying that weight for months without ever putting it down or identifying what it was. When I unfolded the papers and read the dates, one of the things I felt, underneath everything else, was a peculiar kind of relief. Not relief that he had done it. Not relief at being right, but relief at being able to set down the weight I had been carrying without a name for it. Relief at the thing in the pit of my stomach finally having language and form and 4 small pieces of paper I could hold in my hand. Sometimes the thing you are most afraid of, when it arrives, is not as heavy as the anticipation of it. Sometimes what you have been most dreading turns out to be lighter than the dread itself. Not light, but lighter. I chose to tell Patricia because I understood something about how that specific relationship worked. I understood that the most significant power Daniel had in that situation was the power to control the narrative. Men who have been doing something like this for an extended period of time become, without always consciously intending to, remarkably skilled at narrative management. They know how to frame things. They know how to sequence the revelation of information. They know how to be in the room first so that they can shape the emotional temperature before you arrive. They know how to perform contrition in a way that gives the person they are performing for something to respond to, something that makes the other person feel like the situation is being handled, like he is already in the process of being sorry, like your anger or your grief would be kicking a man who is already down. Calling Patricia before Daniel came home was a way of removing the most significant tool from his toolkit. It was a way of ensuring that the first account she received of those 4 receipts was mine, in my voice, in my exact words, without interpretation or framing, or the particular tone a son uses when he is explaining to his mother why something that looks bad is not quite as bad as it looks. I gave her the raw data. I let her sit with it for 40 minutes before he walked through the door. When you take away a person's ability to manage the first impression of a crisis, you take away something they cannot recover within that conversation. You change the shape of what is possible. You change who is standing where when the door opens. I planned none of this consciously. I want to be honest about that. I did not stand in the bedroom doorway with those 4 receipts and think strategically about narrative control and the psychology of crisis management. I stood there and I breathed and I thought, I need her to know before he can explain it. That was the thought. Simple, specific, immediate. The rest is just what that thought looks like when you examine it with more distance than I had available to me in that moment. The instinct was sound. The execution was simple. Pick up the phone. Read the receipts. Say goodnight. My attorney, when I told her the story of that evening, was quiet for a moment and then said, "You made a very effective opening move." She said it with a particular dry admiration of someone who works in a field where people regularly make ineffective opening moves out of pure emotion, and she meant it as a genuine assessment rather than a compliment. I took it as both. We are, all of us, more capable than we believe ourselves to be in the quiet moments before anything has required us to prove it. We are all carrying capacities we have never needed to use and skills we have never had occasion to demonstrate, and reserves of precision and control that exist underneath the ordinary daily self and are waiting, patiently, for the moment they are asked for. You do not know what you are capable of until the moment requires it. I did not know, until that Tuesday in March, that I was capable of standing in a bedroom doorway 7 months pregnant and choosing, with complete deliberateness, not to scream. Not to run, not to collapse, not to do any of the things that would have handed the situation over to someone else's management. I know it now. I will always know it. It is one of the things the terrible Tuesday gave me, and I am clear-eyed enough about this to call it a gift, even now, even in full awareness of everything it cost. Here is what it cost, and here is what it gave me, and here is where I think they balance. It cost me the marriage I thought I had. It cost me the future I had imagined in its specific details. It cost me a particular kind of safety, the safety of believing that the person who knows you most completely is incapable of weaponizing that knowledge against you. It cost me months of hard work in therapy and harder work in the ordinary daily practice of rebuilding a sense of self that had been partially organized around a relationship that no longer existed. It cost me the pasta aisle at the grocery store on a Tuesday afternoon. These are real costs. I do not minimize them. What it gave me is this. It gave me the absolute, bedrock, unshakable knowledge that I can hold the worst thing without falling. It gave me my daughter, who is going to exist regardless, but who I now get to raise in a home that is honest, where the love she is surrounded by is real, and where the people in her life are who they say they are. It gave me, unexpectedly, a relationship with my mother-in-law that is more genuine than anything we managed to build in 4 years of Sunday dinners and holiday gatherings. It gave me the arrabbiata pasta, which I eat regularly now and which is better than the marinara and always was. It gave me myself. The version of myself that stands in doorways and breathes and chooses with intention. The version that picks up the phone. The version that knows what her instincts are telling her and listens. That version was always there. She just needed a Tuesday in March to become fully visible. My daughter is sleeping again. She sleeps the way she does everything, with complete commitment, one arm above her head, face turned slightly to the side, the small, fast breathing of someone who is growing at a rate I cannot entirely track. I watch her sometimes and I try to imagine the person she is going to be, and I cannot do it because she is too new and the world she will grow up in is too unknown, and the person she will become is entirely her own business, assembled from whatever combination of what she was born with and what she will encounter and what she will choose. But I hope for certain things. I hope she will trust her instincts. I hope she will recognize the weight of carrying something without a name for it, and will put that weight down and look at it directly before she has been carrying it too long. I hope she will know that composure is a choice and not a suppression, that being calm in a crisis is not the same as being unfeeling, that you can feel everything and still function, that you can be devastated and still be deliberate. I hope she never needs to find hotel receipts in anyone's jacket pocket. But if she does, I hope she will stand in whatever doorway she finds herself standing in and breathe and know exactly what to do. Or call me. She can always call me. I will be here. I will pick up on the third ring. And I will listen to everything she needs to say. That is the thing about mothers. We show up. We pick up the phone. We listen to the thing that needs to be heard, and we say that we are sorry and we mean it. I learned that from Patricia, of all people. On a Tuesday in March, with 4 hotel receipts on the table between us, and a cup of chamomile tea going slowly cold.